Republicans are eyeing further gains with female voters following a strong showing with the group in Virginia, particularly in the suburbs. According to The Hill's Julia Manchester, an insider who ran polling for Glenn Youngkin's campaign found that female suburban voters are most concerned about kitchen table issues such as grocery prices, cost of living, crime, and education, all core issues that delivered a win for Youngkin in Virginia.
Our colleague Julia Manchester joins us now to discuss Republican strategy further and what messaging Democrats can implement ahead of midterms. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And with Democrats, it's always messaging. They're just going to work on their messaging rather than actually doing something material. But at the same time, there's, Democrats have and are on the brink of passing Build Back Better Act. Let's see if they accomplish that. Why do you think it is that they've been able to enact a child tax credit, otherwise inject a couple $1 trillion into the economy, and yet lose so much ground in the suburbs over the first year of the Biden administration?
Well, I think if we have to look back to the Trump administration and really see the impact that former President Trump had on suburban women. And if we go back to 2018, President Trump's first midterm cycle, we saw that he lost suburban women. And in states like Virginia, we saw Democratic women, mainly Jennifer Wexton, Abigail Spanberger, Elaine Luria, all elected in relatively suburban swing areas as part of a reaction to President Trump. And we saw that candidates like those three that I just mentioned, really across the country, were talking about kitchen table issues in 2018. In 2018, that was really health care and the threat of repealing the Affordable Care Act and how it would impact families and such. So that was a strategy in 2018. Moving into 2020, we saw there was even more of a reaction to President Trump among suburban women. We saw this in the Atlanta suburbs, in Georgia, for example, where we saw that state flip from red to blue at the presidential and Senate level, and really across the country. At the same time, though, Republicans tell me that in various other swing areas in this country, or suburban areas, I should say, there was some ticket splitting going on. So they were rejecting President Trump at the presidential level, but at the same time, electing Republicans in areas like the Los Angeles suburbs, for example, the South Florida suburbs, where we saw some flipped from some seats flipped from Democratic to Republican. So going into 2022, you're seeing Republicans continue to message on the economy, on inflation, rising prices. That really seems to be their top messaging point right now in this moment. Democrats say, though, and to your point, Ryan, about Build Back Better and the child tax credit, they're really relying on the impact those programs could potentially have on families. So it's sort of a wait and see game and see how voters really digest these social programs, how these social programs ultimately go over ahead of 2022.
Yeah, I think it's bad. It's a bad sign for Democrats that, the part of the Republican agenda that is unpopular with suburban voters, with white women, is not actually any part of the agenda, but just Trump himself. So it's almost as if Democrats, they need Trump in a way the Republican Party is the opposite. They not only do they not need Trump, they're worse off with him, because there is a chunk of winnable voters, increasingly winnable voters, who just don't want to vote for Trump, but otherwise agree with Republicans on schools, on inflation, on maybe probably some aspects of the excessive COVID restrictions on kids and other things. How can the Democrats contend with that? They can't. Their plan can't just be, scream Donald Trump's name over and over again, because voters don't like that, because they knew, for instance, in Virginia, that he wasn't on the ballot. He had nothing to do with it. And I think McAuliffe's attempts to make it like he was running against Trump really backfired.
Right. So we saw that McAuliffe really tried to take a page out of that 2018 playbook and make this about Trump. The problem was that Trump wasn't on the ballot. And quite frankly, Glenn Youngkin, who supports a lot of former President Trump's policies and may align with him politically, he's not Donald Trump, and he does not have that same persona, that same personality that Donald Trump has. You saw Terry McAuliffe and a number of his surrogates, including President Biden, former President Obama, try to paint Glenn Youngkin as a conservative extremist in a fleece vest, for example. That didn't go over well because Glenn Youngkin wasn't making this about another candidate who wasn't even running or another political figure. He was making this about slashing the grocery tax, for example, taping ads in grocery stores. That really played over well with a lot of suburban women who, have to, oftentimes are in families who oftentimes have to deal with, budgeting for their families and buying groceries, for example. So I think right now, Democrats need to distance themselves from Trump and talking about Trump and talk about things like the child tax credit, why that would benefit families, why infrastructure could potentially revamp the economy, build back better, how that could impact the economy as well. And I think you're starting to see them really try to do that. The problem is, for Democrats, we don't know what impact these programs are going to have on the economy right now. And you have Republicans and also moderate Democrats like Joe Manchin saying these massive government spending packages are coming at a time when inflation is sky high and that they could likely have a negative impact on the economy. Yeah. So it's really a battle over economic messaging right now. And, we'll just have to wait and see how the average suburban woman and also the voter and also the average voter in general, how they digest that messaging.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are very worried that there's going to be an increase in inflation if we are investing in all of these other programs at the moment. But I think what it sounds like it's boiling down to, based on what you're saying, is that in 2018, when Democrats were able to take the House back, it was because they were messaging on health care, right? They were saying, listen, you don't want them to take your health care from you. And so I think the lesson we're learning from Trump losing, from Democrats winning in some areas, but then Glenn Youngkin winning, is stop the crazy rhetoric, right? Both sides, right? Trump, people didn't like his rhetoric. People don't like a lot of the rhetoric coming from Democrats. So it's kind of stop the crazy rhetoric and then just tell me how you're going to make my life better in a way that's, a lot of people clearly just want to kind of, they want, I don't want to say go back to the way things were, because people like the ACA, people, when they're given programs, they want to keep those programs, but it's a matter of staying out of their way and allowing them to build the life that they're wanting to build and facilitating that ability. And right now with cost of living, like you said, and inflation and, and then there's the rhetoric angle and people are worried about what's happening with their children. It's like the path seems pretty straightforward on how you win elections in this country.
It's interesting. I was talking to a progressive source recently, and they said, although they vehemently deny with the education messaging coming out of Virginia and coming out of that wing of the conservative movement, they do say, look, these operatives, these conservative operatives and strategists are getting in at the local level. And that's something that Democrats as well as progressives haven't done this year that well. They've done it before, but they haven't done it to the point where operatives in Virginia have, to the point where they swung at an election in a swing state or blue leaning state. So it'll be interesting to see how Democrats also are able, or if they're able, to localize a lot of these elections and how you localize a federal election. Look, in Virginia, the education messaging worked well because Glenn Youngkin, as a governor, as a state, as an elected official, has more sway when it comes to that state's education system. For a federal elected official, that's going to be more difficult. So I am curious to see how Republicans are able to federalize that issue of education, which is why I think they're going to probably stick more with their economic messaging ultimately.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, Julia, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'll have more Rising right after this.